Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Shivam. Very good evening. Good evening, Anmol.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. To one and all.
Shivam, you can start.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. To one and all present here. Uh, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. I, Dr. Shivam Bharadwaj, co-director of Satudent India, I am the host of today's webinar. I also like to welcome my co-host, Dr. Palak Tiara, North Zone Head, Cytodent India. I would like to thank the co-founder and director of Cytodent, Dr. Anmol Bagaria, and CEO and founder of Cytopod, Dr. Abhijit Upadhyay, and team Cytodent and Cytopod for organizing this amazing webinar. First of all, I would like to introduce Cytopod. Cytopod is a unique platform in India. It is a digital healthcare ecosystem that provides access to healthcare and enables a real-time appointment scheduling system from doctors, medical practitioners, diagnostic labs to radiological services and pharmaceutical services. Cytopod brings it all together at economic prices and minimum waiting time. Cytodent, another initiative of Cytopod that will put all your efforts to create that beautiful smile on our patients' faces. Now patients don't have to fear for those long queues and busy dentists when they have to have a toothache. They can schedule an appointment according to their ease. So I'm very glad to have you all here, and I hope you all are excited for the same. So let's introduce the topic of today's webinar. That is understanding the disc dynamics in temporomandibular internal dearrangement. Today we have none other than Dr. Darpan Bhargava, MDS, MMS, RCPS UK, PGDHM, PDCR, PhD Clinical Director and Country Head, TMJ Consultancy Services, Southeast Asia. He is Associate Professor of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery Department in People's College of Dental Sciences and Research Center, People's University, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. Dr. Bhargava has completed his BDS and MDS from Meenakshi Animal Dental College, Chennai. He was a distinction holder and gold medalist from the Tamil Nadu Dr. MGR Medical University and Meenakshi Academy of Higher Education, Chennai. He has also successfully completed the Diploma of Membership in Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery from Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, Glasgow. He also have a postgraduate diploma in hospital management and clinical research. He is credited with introduction of twin MEX nerve blocks for mandible anesthesia. Currently, he is serving as an associate professor and clinical consultant in the Department of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery at People's College of Dental Sciences, People's University, Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. He has also have 70 national and international scientific publications to his credit. He holds first ever Indian patent and a copyrighted surgical technique for the temporomandibular joint prosthesis. He has completed his PhD from Meenakshi University, Chennai, for his acclaimed research on predictability and feasibility of total alloplastic temporomandibular joint reconstruction using DARSN TM joint prosthesis for patient in Indian subcontinent. We are very glad to have you, sir, today. Sir, over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shivam, for the wonderful introduction. And I thank Anmol. In fact, she was instrumental in getting me here. We had been in touch with some of the temporomandibular joints she's undertaken as her research project. So I thank everyone at the Cytodent for giving me this opportunity to be in front of all of you. In fact, and I would be talking about a very intricate topic which is maybe very common and a kind of less understood one as it comes to the clinical diagnosis. So we would concentrate on diagnosing such problems and maybe allowing people to recognize these issues at the earliest. So this is my aim, that at the end of this talk, all of you are in a position to accurately diagnose to some extent, and if not treat, refer the patient to the appropriate center for an appropriate treatment. So let us start with it. Very good evening to one and all. To introduce myself, I am Dr. Darpan Bhargav. I've been working with temporomandibular joint and its problems for some time now in our country. Uh, Basically, just to get familiar with all of you, I have finished my basic dental degree from Meenakshi Ammal Dental College and Hospital, Chennai, followed by my post graduation in oral and maxillofacial surgery, and then eventually I have completed my postdoctoral research and PhD from Meenakshi Academy of Higher Education and Research, again from Chennai, which was pointed towards joint replacement surgeries. I've also done my membership diploma from Royal College of Physician Surgeon Glasgow, and currently I am associated with People's University here in Bhopal. So most of my listeners know all this very well, but just to brief the new ones, just out of interest, I did some hospital management courses from Madurai Kamaraj University, followed by my clinical research in drug inventions from Catalyst. So this was my brief profile, and beyond that, I work under a banner of TMJ Consultancy, and its associated educational unit of TMJ Foundation, Southeast Asia. We are doing some kind of an research and a lot of clinical work in temporomandibular joint currently in India. So when it comes to temporomandibular joint per se, I must say that, okay, diagnosing problems of temporomandibular joint may not be very easy, but if we have some insight into it and we develop some interest into this particular branch of, I would say, dentistry, followed by oral maxillofacial surgery and specialization of joint diseases as such. So it is not impossible to diagnose these problems. I'm not saying every one of us should go and treat them, but at least all of us should go and diagnose it well, because the patients suffer because the diagnosis is not set right from the start. So we should aim at diagnosing these problems well, and then eventually referring them to a center which is dealing with the problems which can treat these ailments. So the aim is that. Now let's start with a small problem. When we talk about joint pain, it affects as large as 12% of our population. When we say 12% of our population, I mean that general population, if we pick up 100 random people, 12 of them would be suffering from temporomandibular joint issues. Now, when we say that out of 112 are suffering from this problem, imagine how common it is. Secondly, among them also, you see this is more prevalent among female population. So the division wise, males are a little less affected, females are more affected. But if you randomly pick up 100 people around you, the 12 of them would be suffering from some kind of these problems, and it is kind of undiagnosed most of the times. So we are aiming at doing some good to such a large number of people around. Now, when we talk about temporomandibular and we start treating it, we think it as a burden because the insight is not there. We do not get into intricacies of it. Now, what happens? The patient usually comes to you with pain. Patient says that I have pain, and the usual medication as a dentist or a maxillofacial surgeon or a general doctor, the answer is either NSAIDs, or you would want to prescribe some anti-inflammatories, analgesics, and muscle relaxants for this particular problem. Okay, you're treating pain. My question is, why pain? Why do the patient present in front of you with pain? That should be diagnosed. It is not aiming at only treating pain. Okay, you can kill pain for some time, and the patient is off the medications. After some time, patient comes back to you with pain again. So our aim is not to destroy pain at that particular instance when patient reports to you, but to diagnose the problem, pick up the issues patient is suffering inside his joint and around his joint, and treat them, and not only pain. When patient comes to you, we give these medications. Common notion: give splint. TMJ problem, give splint. But what is the problem? For what problem should you give splint? Any patient presents to a general dentist with temporomandibular joint problem, the common notion is we will give muscle relaxants and we will give a splint. But why? What are we trying to do with it? Okay, splint may help, but in what cases? Where is it helping? And some patients, if we have a lot of clinicians around who are working in the clinical setup and they have advised splints, I would say they would have experienced. They have given splint therapy and patient comes back to you saying, "Oh, my problem is increased. I have more pain after you gave me this." Because primarily we did not understand why are we giving this, and is this particular problem which is presented as pain in front of us is indication, is a definite indication for a splint or not. We did not understand that. So that is one. Next, the common thing which we see is a lot of TENS therapies being given around, because we see in our teaching days and our colleges that if patient has pain, you give TENS. Now, why do you give TENS? Where do you give TENS? In which patients do you give TENS? We are not aware. We know that it kills pain, we should give it. And it is another kind of modality which should be given for such patients. Secondly, ultrasound uh, physio. Ultrasound physiotherapy is commonly done. We refer the patient for a physiotherapy center, and this is another modality which is commonly practiced. Okay, then followed by which now commonly the growing field is arthrosynthesis and arthroscopy as people are learning it. Okay, I'm not against it, but are we justified in doing it in that particular patient is important. Is diagnosis made or not? Patient has pain, you've given splint, you've given muscle relaxants, you've done some intervention like uh, electrical therapy and physiotherapy, no relief. Okay, next stage is you do a arthrocentesis. But is that particular patient an indication for it? In case the patient is not an indication for this procedure, you're doing no good to the patient, it may even harm. So that issue should be sorted out. Now, when we talk about temporomandibular joint in particular, you see that it is a very small joint with very small spaces inside it. Just to brush ourselves, you have the component of a temporal bone which forms a glenoid fossa or the mandibular fossa. In front of the mandibular fossa, you have an articular eminence, which is kind of a stop for the joint to go further ahead in its movement. And you have the condylar head, which is made from the mandibular bone, and the entire component is encased in a capsule. Okay, you have a covering around the entire joint, and inside the joint you have two spaces, the superior space and the inferior space, and in between you have a small disc. Now, most of the problems in internal derangements are due to disharmony in movement of the condylar head, and we should understand that in this particular joint you have the superior component, which is the glenoid fossa and the temporal bone, and you have the mandibular condyle. Only the condylar portion is mobile. Okay, your superior portion is always fixed, it doesn't move. Only the lower head of the condyle moves. The mandibular portion of the condyle moves. Along with its movement, God has given us a cushioning layer between the bone superiorly and bone inferiorly, that the disc should accompany the condyle all the time when it moves. This cushion should rest between the superior bone and the inferior bone all the time when the condyle moves. So as the condyle is moving, you need the disc to move along with the condylar head. This should commonly happen. Now, when we see the intricate relationship of muscles, you would see that the superior head of lateral pterygoid attaches to the intervening disc or the articular disc, and the lower head of the lateral pterygoid goes and attaches to the pterygoid fovea at the neck of the condyle. This arrangement is done by the supreme power so that when the muscle is activated and your condylar head is pulled forward, it comes forward when the muscle contracts, the superior head also pulls the disc along with the condylar head. So there is synchrony. There should be a balance. The same muscle pulling two components, the disc and the condyle. So the movement is balanced. So this should normally happen. Now, what exactly happens when you move your jaw? It is a very fine balance between your dentition, your muscles of mastication, your ligaments which control this movement, and along with the intracondylar or intra-articular components that move along with the condylar head and the disc. So it is a very fine balance. The entire stomatognathing system should maintain this balance, that teeth are in order, the muscles are in order, the disc moves along with the condylar head, and there is fine balance between the movement of the disc and the condylar head in relation to the glenoid fossa. So this is another thing which should be kept in mind. Now, when we talk about the disc in particular, now in this particular slide, you would see that when the condylar head moves forward, the disc accompanies the condylar head. We would understand the type of movements in a short while, but this basic we should understand. And when the mouth is opening, the condyle comes forward. When condyle comes forward, the cushion of the condyle should move along with the condyle, right? Now, this is a very peculiar picture if you see in a normal joint. Okay, you see if all of you can have a look at my arrow, you would see that this is the articular eminence, this is the glenoid fossa, you have the condylar head, and you have the intervening disc. And this is the retrodiscal attachment or the retrodiscal tissue. And we have sliced the condyle in a sagittal plane. We have sliced the condyle in a sagittal plane. Now, when you see this churning and grinding effect, you would understand the importance of this disc. Now, imagine the disc wouldn't have been there. Then both the bones would have been rubbing against each other. Okay, so we don't want that to happen. There is something called a synovial fluid, which is a kind of lubricant in this area. You see all this chippa type of things because it's a fresh cut specimen. You see that is the lubricant which is present there. The main component is lubricin inside the synovial fluid, which maintains this lubrication inside the joint. And you see the condylar head as it moves forward, you have the disc. Now look at this movement. It comes forward and the disc moves forward along with it. So this is what should happen. Now this is the MRI, magnetic resonance imaging of the same phenomena which we just saw, because we can't cut up all these patients and see that. So this is the most acceptable dynamic MRI which we can see easily. Now if you see, the disc moves along with the condylar head in the MRI, and you see the beautiful pulling, anterior pulling of the lateral pterygoid of the disc. So this is the normal which should happen. Now, when we talk about the joint per se, generally to revise, it is called as gigliomo-arthroidal joint because it has two kind of motions. Now, I would explain that. I just briefed you about the condyle moving forward, but actually inside the condyle, you have two kind of movements happening. One is the hinging movement, the movement which you would see in your door when you open and close the door. There is a hinge attached to the door which lets the door open and close. So it is only in one axis. The door keeps rotating around that hinge. So the hinging movement and the arthroidal movement, that is the sliding movement. In that sliding movement, the location of the condyle changes. From the normal rest position, it comes more anteriorly when you open the mouth. So you have the ginglymus hinging movement and you have arthroidal or sliding movement. So the joint per se is called as gangliomo-arthmoidal joint. Okay, so we'll understand it a little more. Let's see. Now, if you see this initial rotation and forward movement, you see initial rotation. Now it is rotating and it's coming forward. So this is what happens in the joint. Now you have two components inside the joint. We just had a look at it. You have the upper joint space and you have the lower joint space and you have the intervening disc. We should just understand that the lower joint space provides an opportunity for the condyle to hinge, to rotate. So when the rotation is happening, it only happens at the condylar head and the disc position does not change during rotation. Understandable, because I said that when the condyle moves forward, the cushion should move forward. So when it is rotating in the same area, the disc need not move. It has to stay there. So the disc is staying there and lower joint space provides the rotational movement. But when the condylar head comes forward, it translates, it comes forwards, the disc also should come forward. So this translatory movement happens in the upper joint space. Okay, so the rotation happens in the lower joint space and the translation happens in the upper joint space, because disc also moves forward when the condylar head moves forward. So just to understand, you see rotation. When you see rotation, you have the rollover movement in the same area, and when you see translation, you see that the wheel moves forward. So rotation is moving there itself and translation is coming forward. Now coming to internal derangement. Now we, by this introduction, I think we are very well aware that what exactly is happening inside the joint. Now once you are aware that what exactly is happening inside the joint, you would see that when the condylar head rotates, now this area where my arrow is anterior and this area is posterior, and this is your external auditory meatus. Okay, the arrow shows the external auditory meatus. You have the disc and you have the condylar head. Now when you see this particular movement, you will see that it rotates slightly, the disc remains there, then the disc comes forward along with the condylar head. This is normal. Okay, this is normal joint. Now let us see something abnormal. Compare this normal with the disc displacement with reduction. We have a condition called disc displacement with reduction. In internal derangement, you may divide it broadly into disc displacement with reduction and disc displacement without reductions. So now we're comparing a normal joint. We are very well versed by this initial few slides that the normal joint, what exactly is happening. Okay, to the left hand side. Now on the right hand side, you see the disc displacement with reduction. Now in this particular case, what happens is disc does not rest in its normal resting position. It rests a little anterior. When the disc is resting a little anterior and when the condyle is trying to move, the disc gets folded slightly in the anterior region, and as the condyle tries to move still further ahead while mouth opening, you see that the disc occupies its normal position where it should be. So the cushion is lying anterior anyways, that condyle is trying to move forward, and during the motion, during this particular dynamics, the disc tries to come back to its normal position and give the cushioning effect between the superior bone and the inferior bone. So this is condition is called as disc displacement with reduction. When the disc pops back to its normal position to perform its normal function, you see a click or a pop. So the click which you feel is because of this, because this snaps back to its original position trying to perform its job normally. So you find a click there. Now you have a condition called disc displacement without reduction. In a previous condition, the disc displacement with reduction, you would see a normal mouth opening in a patient with a click. Patient will not have any problems in mouth opening. Patient may present with pain or may not present with pain. That is a different issue altogether. Now, in this particular scenario, you would see this displacement without reduction. Now, what happens here? The disc is displaced from its normal position. It is anterior to the condylar head. Although here we are depicting it as anterior, you have various displacements: medial displacement, lateral displacement, posterior displacement, supralateral, like that. A lot of displacements are there. But to understand, let us look at this picture. To my right side, you see that the disc gets folded and never comes back to its normal cushioning position. So it is stuck there. It does not come back. So disk displacement without reduction, the disk never comes back to its normal cushioning position, and it gets stuck there because it is stuck in front of the condyle. Condyle is not able to move freely in the anterior direction. Patient will present to you with pain and reduced mouth opening because it is blocking the condylar path. The disc is blocking the condylar path. So it is causing reduction in mouth opening. These patients will also present with the deviation in mouth opening. This side lateral pterygoid is also not functioning normally. So the mouth will get deviated to the affected side. So this is disc displacement without reduction. Now, when you look at this condition, let us deviate a little bit from the topic because these patients are confused with internal derangements. Now, this is a tomographic picture. You see, we understand condyle rotates and translates and moves forwards and comes back to its normal position. Now, when you see this particular picture, you would see that when the condyle is moving out of the glenoid fossa in the tomographic image where my arrow is. Okay, this is your glenoid fossa, this is your articular eminence, and the condyle pops out of the glenoid fossa. These problems are called as hypermobility disorders. Okay, now with this here, we should endorse that if we want to evaluate a disc, either you do it clinically or you do it using an MRI. Radiographs are not an option to evaluate disc. You don't see disc in a radiograph. It is a soft tissue structure and only MRI can reveal the disc and its location and movement. Radiographs does not show any of the soft tissues. The only thing which you would see in a radiograph is, if you see this first picture, a pulling effect. When the disc is stuck, the lateral pterygoid is trying to pull the condyle at its attachment, and you see this pointed area which is called as lipping or beaking. Lipping or beaking in most of the internal derangement patients. If you see this arrow here, red arrow, this indicates the pull of the lateral pterygoid muscle. You would see that the condylar head with eventual pulling gets elongated. Functional matrix theory. The muscle is trying to pull, the bone elongates. So you would see that beaking effect in the radiograph. That is all you would see. Other than that, disc will not be seen at all. Now, when I just deviated from the topic, hypermobility, it should not be confused with your internal derangement. In hypermobility, what happens? The most common reason is you have a flattened articular eminence. This eminence is flattened. This is a CT image. You see external auditory meatus, you see the condylar head, and you see that the articular eminence is quite flat here. Now, if you see this particular, if you see this particular slide, you would see that if the articular eminence is flattened, the condyle slips out of the glenoid fossa, stretching its ligaments. Okay, you see there the disc is here posteriorly to the condyle, and the condyle is slipped off the glenoid fossa. This you would appreciate in this particular picture, that you have red line which indicates the glenoid fossa. You have the head of the condyle which is indicated in green, and you see that it jumps off out. Closed mouth, it is inside. Open mouth, it has jumped out. So this is a hypermobility disorder, a completely different disorder from the internal derangement, and it should be managed in a different manner. Now, if you give splint for internal derangement and you give splint for this, it will not work for both the cases. It will work, it may work for particular internal derangement cases, but hypermobility splint therapy is not the answer. It doesn't work. A famous quotes which a lot of people say, which I hear: surgery has no role in temporomandibular joint disorders. I have never seen TMD that has required a surgery. We keep managing it with muscle relaxant. That's all. Then conservative treatments fail when patients don't follow instructions. We keep giving splints, we keep doing muscle relaxant therapy, and eventually you get fed up, patient gets fed up, and you say conservative therapy doesn't work for these patients because this particular fellow is not following my instructions. I told him to wear this splint 12 hours in a day, and he's just wearing it for 5 hours or 6 hours in a day. That's all. But what exactly happens is surgery has no role. People who say that, they do not have the idea what surgery or what interventions can do in such patients. So we should open up our mind, because now options are there. We should not trouble the patients, diagnose them well and treat them well. Then second, that I have never seen a surgical case because I have no idea what to look for. You're not diagnosing it well. How will you go to a decision that I would refer this particular patient or I would perform surgery in this particular patient? Ultimately, you keep blaming the patient. You don't follow, you don't follow, you don't follow, and it's all failed. Patient goes somewhere else and the same cycle starts. Now, for this, I would recommend all of you to read this particular reference from George Dimitropoulos from Australia, a surgical classification of temporomandibular joint disorders. It's published in International Journal of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery. In this particular classification, see, he has divided the entire spectrum of diseases into 5 classes, 5 categories, basically modeled on Wilkie's classification, which we keep reading, but it has included some surgical plan in it. So it has 4 components. You get the clinical details of a patient, you get the radiological details of the patient, you as in conclude to a diagnosis, proper diagnosis, and then start treating. So in category 1 patients, clinical presentation would be patient complains to you with pain. There is no sound in the joint, no noise in the joint, no locking, no dislocation, only pain. Okay, patient is able to open his mouth normally, chew normally, perform normal, but only pain is present. In such patients, only these particular patients are the patients for muscle relaxant therapy. Apart from that, if you have advanced stages, the further treatments would vary. So a normal radiograph would show no findings, MRI would show no findings in such patients. The diagnosis would be just a contusive type of trauma, contusive injury, or muscle pain, and you treat accordingly. So give some muscle relaxant therapy, and along with that, you should give maybe splint therapy for such patients. A stabilizing splint should help. A soft stabilizing splint should help in such patients. Now, when in first category, you surgery has no role, accepted. In second category, the patient would present with some kind of joint clicking. If clicking is present, you have the diagnosis that internal derangement is present. Now you have to differentiate whether mouth opening is normal or not. You do an MRI for such patients. It is a mandatory thing that to assess this, only MRI is helpful. Other than that, a radiograph would not show you any soft tissue inside the joint or around the joint. So in early internal derangements, where a mild, you have a click, you have plus or minus pain, you would want to do minimum arthrocentesis to salvage the joint or get the joint back into normal function. So these are the patients where if you do a definitive treatment, you would accept some results, expect some results. Now these are the indications for arthrocentesis. These particular patients will have click and the patient reports to you with pain, and patient is able to open normal his mouth normally. You at least do arthrocentesis and start on medication and plus or minus splint therapy. Third category, now in these patients, patient has a painful lock. Okay, these are the patients with internal derangement without reduction. In these particular patients, if you see, TMJ arthroscopy has a major role currently. If you can introduce a small scope, if I can show you the scope which we commonly use for arthroscopy in my video window. If you can have a look, this is the scope which we use. This particular thing is the scope. This rod goes inside the joint. This is for the attachment of the light source to introduce light inside the joint, and this is the attachment for the camera. So we attach a camera here for displaying what is inside the joint on a digital screen. We attach a light source here, and this rod goes inside the joint to evaluate what is happening inside the joint, and we have very fine miniature instruments which we can introduce along with it and get the disc back into position. This is the arthroscope which is indicated for category 3 patients according to dermatologists. Now category 4 patients. Now in these patients have further symptomatic problems than the previous category, where there is painful cryptus, grating sound, rubbing of bone, indicative of some kind of disc perforation mostly. So these particular patients, you would have to do a open joint surgery, minimum TMJ discectomy or condyloplasty or high condylar shave. These patients would require all these things. Category 5 patients are the end stage patients where you have the entire architecture of the joint distorted, and these are definitive surgical patients, no doubt about not doing any surgery for such patients. So when we conclude, we would say that a category 1 patient, only pain, no click, they are normal TMJs with some in minor trauma which has induced these problems. When I say minor trauma, it may be because of the occlusal problems also. You have occlusal discrepancy having its effect on the joint, or you have had a hit on the chin and your joint is painful. So all these patients. Second, minor changes in the TMJ. Third is moderate changes. Fourth, severe changes. And fifth category is non-salvageable joint. So when we talk about the intervention, category 1 patients need not have any surgery. Category 2 patients, minimum you should do arthrosynthesis followed by or accompanied with your conservative therapy and splint therapy. Category 3 patients are indications for arthroscopy. Category 4, definite open joint surgery. Category 5, PMJ, definitive resective surgeries. So just to start with, how do we start intervening? Okay, muscle relaxation, splint therapy, we all are aware. I would not do that. This particular thing, we would start with arthrosynthesis and arthroscopy. So the minimum intervention we can do is arthrosynthesis for, say, we said category 2 patients. In arthrosynthesis, what we do is we introduce a needle inside the joint and we kind of do a joint lavage. The acceptable fluid which we use is ringalactate for this. And in this particular thing, we just irrigate the joint with the ringalactate and clean up the joint space. Some medicaments may also be introduced like steroids, and most of the patients would have good mouth opening with only this much of intervention. Now, just to have a look at arthroscopy, we had this patient who had a click in the joint and she had locking episodes. This was her normal radiographic study because the soft tissue wouldn't have been seen in a radiograph. So someone had ordered an CT scan, and CT scan revealed nothing except for mild lipping. If you would see anteriorly, a small beak is present anteriorly. Then when we did an MRI, we saw that she also had a reduction in mouth opening. You would see that the anterior displacement of the disc which is stuck there doesn't move. So because of this particular problem, she had reduction in mouth opening. Now we did an arthroscopy for this particular patient. We introduced the rod I showed you, the arthroscope, which goes inside the joint to visualize what is exactly happening inside the joint. And you would see, now we are inside the joint. You would see that a lot of fibrous adhesions were there inside the joint. So you had some redness, which you see, the engorged blood vessels, which are indicative of synovitis, inflammation inside the joint, the big, large blood vessels. And then you see a lot of wool-like structure, fibrous structure, that is your adhesions. So what we did a sweep diagnostic arthroscopy did adhesion lysis, and we kept the patient for on medications for synovitis, and the patient was relieved with this. So these are particular patients who are indications for arthroscopy. Okay, now you see a normal, on your left side you would see a normal joint, see clean space, a cave-like structure. You would see the head of the condyle below and the roof of the glenoid fossa. Everything is seen. Okay, this is normal joint. And on to your right side, you would see a joint with a lot of wool-like structure, fibrous adhesions, and synovitis, engorged blood vessels. So you can compare then arthroscopic view of a clean, clear joint and joint which has got adhesions and synovitis. So this is what arthroscope can tell us, which even an MRI cannot reveal. Now, when we talk about arthroscopy, it is basically indicated for cases with acute lock and chronic lock more than 4 weeks. So we can do it for a chronic lock case if patient reports to us in more than 4 weeks, or acute lock cases. When I say lock means the disc is locked in front of the condyle, patient is not able to open the mouth. When suddenly would say I had a click and today morning I opened my mouth and I'm not able to open my mouth completely and it is paining very badly. So these are the patients who would go towards the diagnosis of lock or internal derangement without reduction. When it goes to subluxation and internal derangement, what can be done? Subluxation and internal derangement, I again and again saying, because subluxation problems, hypermobility problems are very different from internal derangement, and it should be managed very differently. We should not get confused with subluxation and internal derangement. This is subluxation. When the joint moves further ahead from its normal position is subluxation. Now for subluxation, you have anchoring, either anchoring procedures, you tighten the capsule. You tighten that particular area and tighten the capsule by surgery. So you will have subluxation which stops. Then you have blocking procedures that the bone in front of the condylar head, you fracture it and get it down, and you avoid or you let the condyle restricted to its normal position. Third is elimination of any hindrance. You cut off the articular eminence and let the condyle move freely. So the churning effect of the disc does not happen between the bones. The patient will be relieved of symptoms. So that is another thing. So these are the procedures which should be surgically done for hypermobility and not the treatments which we do for internal derangement. Now, this particular case, if you want to be a little conservative with hypermobility disorders, there is a procedure called prolotherapy, or introduction of dextrose inside the joint in the ligaments, so that there is some fibrosis in the ligaments, and because of the fibrosis the movement is restricted. So this is one thing which can be done apart from before you undertake the patient for surgery. People have also advocated introducing autologous blood for this particular reason. Now, just few cases we would see quickly, and we would want to conclude this. Now, we see that for this hypermobility problems and internal derangement where the disc is not under control, you would see that we do a disc repositioning procedures. Now you see this particular thing, we do a preauricular incision for these patients. Now once you go through preauricular area, the area in front of your ear, you open up and try and reach the joint area. You open up the joint capsule. Once you open up the joint capsule, you will visualize the bony structure and the disc. Once you identify the disc, now if you see the image on your left, you would see that in a hemostat, the disc is held. You identify the disc, you see the correct position of the disc, remove adhesions, mobilize the disc. At this instance, you can tighten the capsular ligaments also. At this instance, you can also do a disc plication procedure. So this is the surgical part. When we proceed ahead from category 3 patients, we would want to do something like this. These are the procedures for open joint surgery. You identify the disc and do the procedure on the disc or the capsule. Now, see, this is disc plication. They are repositioning the disc with nylon sutures. They are taking the disc backwards and they're suturing it to the retrodiscal tissue and positioning it. This is the diagrammatic picture of what disc repositioning means. It is held up in normal position after opening up the joint and it is tied with a suture. So this is one option. Now, one procedure which we do is we use micro screws to tie the disc onto the condylar head. So this avoids the conflict of disc and condylar head movement. So micro screw is used and the disc is tied onto the condylar head. So when the condyle moves, the disc always remains with the condyle. So when the patients where we cannot get the disc in its normal position with disc plication or disc recapitulation procedures, we do this procedure. We use a micro screw and we anchor the disc onto the condylar head. So the cushion always remains with the condylar head, which we discussed. So when it is irreparable, we cannot manage or do all these things. We do something called as joint replacement surgery. Now, at end stage diseases, when we are not able to manage these joints conservatively, we do a total joint replacement. We do have a technology with us where we can completely replace the joint. It is a similar procedure like your knee replacement surgeries or hip replacement surgeries, which is in practice currently in orthopedics. So we have a system, a joint system, where we remove the defective joint and we replace the entire joint with the artificial joint. So the procedure for this replacement is, in particular, again you go ahead opening up the joint space with preauricular with an extension in the temporal region. Normally we use a Alkyd-Bramley incision for this particular intervention. Now you see that whatever joint was defective, you open up the preauricular area, identify the condylar head and get rid of the defective condyle or the ankylotic mass or the end stage joint which was present there. After we have done that, created space at the lateral ramus and the infratemporal region, we replace it with an artificial fossa and artificial joint. If you see in this particular picture, if you can identify my arrow, this white area is fixed onto the zygomatic arch. This is the artificial fossa, and you see the golden shining structure down in front of the ear. This is the artificial condylar head. I would show you the photographs or the radiograph shortly. Now you see this particular radiograph. You see that the condyle is fixed onto the lateral ramus and the superior aspect. The glenoid fossa is kind of a ultra high molecular weight polymer, which is not seen on the radiograph. So you would not appreciate it, but you would see some screws here, which are fixed onto the zygomatic arch to anchor the glenoid fossa, artificial glenoid fossa of the polymer here. And you see the condylar head down. Patient usually has good mouth opening following such surgeries on table, followed by which you may have to keep the patient on physiotherapy to maintain this mouth opening. Now, this particular slide would give you a fair idea of how the artificial joint functions. You see the white portion screwed onto the zygomatic arch here on top. That is the artificial glenoid fossa. And you see the condylar head, which is moving inferiorly, which is attached to the lateral aspect of the ramus of the mandible, and patient is able to open and close the mouth, or we are checking it intraoperatively whether the joint is functioning fine or not. So this is total joint temporomandibular joint replacement surgery, which can be undertaken at end stage diseases. Then I would request all of you, if you can get a knack of this, a journal of stomatology and maxillofacial surgery gives this reference: predictability and feasibility of total alloplastic temporomandibular joint reconstruction for our Indian population in particular. So if you can get this paper online, or if someone is interested, they can mail me. I'll send you the full text of the paper. Go through this, that how this technology works. It gives all this in much details. So I think we are through, and if you have any questions which we can take now.
Good evening, sir, and good evening, everyone. I'm Palak Tehara. Sir, first of all, I would like to take the opportunity and say thank you to you for a very amazing session.
Thank
You
you,
have
Palak. Thanks a lot.
enlightened us with all your knowledge, and we have learned a lot with this session, a lot of things that we didn't know about it. So, I would like to take a few questions that we have, and I would request you to please answer it.
Yeah, please tell.
When should we go for a TMJ evaluation? Erupting third molar have led to clicking of TMJ. And what should be the evaluation for such a case? Evaluation protocol for such a case.
Now, what happens is when you have a third molar erupting, okay, one temporomandibular joint problems in particular, although we keep directing it towards third molars, we keep directing it towards occlusion. The new norms is that occlusion does not have a major role. It has a role. I'm not saying it doesn't have a role. It has a role, but it does not have a major role on the joint problems. So joint problems should be treated as joint problems, and occlusion should be checked for discrepancy. Now, what exactly happens in most of the cases that we aim at treating the joint, but we attribute the entire problem to the occlusion. Because you have bad occlusion, your joint is bad. It doesn't go like that. N number of patients have bad occlusion. They do not have joint problems. So that means that all the malocclusions do not contribute to joint issues. Okay, now what happens in third molar eruptions? When you have third molar erupting, you have dynamically changing occlusion. The third molar erupts very late in life, around say 16 to 20s. Now, when the third molar is erupting around 16, 17, 18, 20, when it is coming into occlusion, it tries to set your existing dentition to accommodate itself. Most of the cases you don't have enough place, it tries to push and pull and tries to come out in its normal occlusion, which is normal tendency. If it is not, it does not get impacted. With that, you have minor discrepancy in occlusion, changes, dynamic changes in occlusion, and the temporomandibular joint is such a beautiful joint that most of the time it tries to remodel according to your occlusal changes. It keeps changing according to your forces. So you may feel that as your third molar is erupting, you have developed a click, or you have some pain in the joint, because it is remodeling. It is trying to get adapted to the new things happening inside your oral cavity. Okay, so removing third molar will get your joint back to normal is not the answer. If you have a problem with third molar, it should be treated separately. If you have the issue with the joint, it should be treated separately. It is just coincidental that when your occlusion was adjusting to the newly erupting teeth, your joint was not fast enough to remodel according to the changes in the oral cavity. So internal derangement has set in because your joint was not able to adapt to those changes. But now again, if you have a click, going back to category 2 of the classification, you treat the joint according to the category 2. You do not try and correlate that because I had the third molar erupting, I have the joint problem, I'll get rid of the third molar and my joint will settle down automatically. In some cases, it may settle down automatically because it had to settle down, not because you got a third molar removed. But in other cases, it may not go back to its original dynamics. In those cases, you should address your joint separately, get it treated.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the next question is, can asymptomatic displacement further complicate this kind of situation?
See, when you have disc displacement, it is asymptomatic. How will you know that is a disc displacement? Patient would at least have a click.
Okay.
Without that, no one would undergo an MRI to check if you have a disc displacement or not. Patient may not have pain, agreed. In all cases, patient may not have pain, but this displacement, the presenting symptom would be at least a click. So you address the click.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sir, since all of us know that you have been a pioneer in your field, so have you ever encountered a patient with anchor disc phenomena?
Yes,
So
we
could you
have
please talk about
had.
it?
See, anchored disk phenomena, what exactly happens? Now, anchored disk phenomena is, again, it is a growing science. A lot of us do not understand anchored disk phenomena well, because, again, the problem is that it requires an MRI to actually identify and diagnose this problem. You don't see soft tissue problems in a X-ray, which is commonly available, and all the patients you don't refer for an MRI. Now, in this anchored disc phenomena, what exactly happens? Now, the recent concept is the cupping effect, the suction effect. The disc with its suction effect gets adherent to at a particular position in the bone and does not move normally. It gets anchored there, it gets stuck there. So these are the different issues. Now, one simple thing which you can do for anchored disc phenomena is some amount. If it is very initial, you can advise the patient to do isometric exercises that may release that anchor. If not, go ahead with arthrocentesis minimum. Okay. Now, mostly the suction effect of the disc is to the condylar head, and only the superior joint lavage may not help. You may have to arthroscopically explore the inferior joint space to release the suction effect of the disc onto the condylar head. So, anchor disc is a vague term, and it is broadly now being classified into small different kind of problems.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sir, what is the management protocol of a hypermobility case?
See, hypermobility case, if you want to minimally start treating it with conservative means, at least a dextrose prolotherapy, that is the injection of dextrose solution into the retrodiscal space and the pericapsular space, that would induce some fibrosis in and around the joint and reduce the mobility of the joint. That is one. Second, now people are also trying to use autologous blood injections in and around the joint, as we know that blood in the joint space or around the joint space would be irritant to the tissues around and would induce fibrosis. The only problem with this is that you may end up in a consolidated joint like hemarthrosis, and it consolidates and you end up in ankylosis. So that is the only concern which we have reservations with. Otherwise, autologous blood is also an option. People do a sclerotherapy treatment where they introduce sodium tetradecyl sulfate in the retrodiscal tissue to sclerose the retrodiscal tissue so that the movement of the condyle is restricted or it doesn't move as freely as it was moving in a hypermobility state. So these are the conservative means. If the patient does not respond to the conservative, these may need multiple injections. Uh, 4 weekly, one injection is usually required for autologous blood or sclerotherapeutic agent. So these, if it doesn't work, then you go ahead with the surgical RAFE for the capsule, or you tighten the retrodiscal area. So that may be the option.
Okay. Sir, the way you said about replacing TMJ joint, so can those joint be from a natural source? Like, can we take the TMJ from a cadaver and replace it with a person? Like you told us that they're artificial. Can we use the original ones from a cadaver and replace it in a human, which could be matched?
See, now if that is a possibility, it would be only under research. One is ethical issues. It would come under the norms of organ donation. One. Second, you have a freeze-dried bone grafting, which can be done. You take a bone from another source and you implant it here. In all these cases, that particular bone will be avascular. It will not have its own blood supply. So you don't have control over the resorption rates. A free bone graft of that size or magnitude, if you're taking from another, so I'm not talking about cadaveric specimen or bovine specimen, but any free bone graft for that matter, if you take, it does not have its vascularity and it may end up into complete resorption. You do such a big surgery and end of it, you don't have anything. So that
Okay.
is the concern.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, what is the material used for micro screw, and are micro screws safe when we use it?
They are called as anchor screws and they are made of medical grade titanium, a similar material of which your dental implant is made. So when you introduce a dental implant in the bone, it usually gets osseointegrated and remains there. So it is the same material which is used for dental implants. In fact, the temporomandibular joint which we manufacture for total joint replacement surgeries is also made from medical grade titanium.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I must say the session was amazing and it was very enlightenment, as well as the audience. They loved it. Thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule and accepting us and coming here and telling us about all the knowledge that we could get from you. I would like to thank our core team, Cytodent India, the co-founder and director, Dr. Anmol. Ma'am, would you like to say a few words?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Sir, I would like to thank you. It's an honor and privilege having you here. Sir, it's an honor and privilege having you here this evening. Thank you for being my mentor and guiding me always. It's always a pleasure learning from you. Thank you for giving such a wonderful session and sharing the core knowledge of the topic with us today. I'd also like to thank the audience for being with us today evening. And lastly, I would thank the host and the co-host, Dr. Shivam and Dr. Palak, for hosting the session today, and also my team, Cytodent. Thank you. Over to you, Palak.
Thank you everyone for your patient listening and enjoying the session with us today. The webinar series will be continued with our next webinar on Sunday, that is 30th of August. Please stay tuned. We'll be waiting to have you there. Until then, stay safe, stay home. Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Palak.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Anmol. And in fact, I have Vivek who has joined me here in the session.
Yes, sir.